in that role, and he looks forward to still supporting the Ward 7 dams in any way, shape, and form. So we just want to say thank you, Ms. Siki, and we look forward to continuing to work with you. Additionally, the Ward 7 dams, we passed a resolution on ranked choice voting. We followed suit as the DC Democratic State Party. And for folks who are interested in testifying, a hearing will be held on November the 11th. And if you want to testify, the link is in this PowerPoint presentation. Please feel free to do so. We have a few events coming up, big events, and we would love for folks to be involved in that process, the planning process, to kind of lighten the load for members on the executive body. But those two events are, number one, the Lorraine Whitlock dinner. We plan to have the Lorraine Whitlock dinner in April, but the way in which we envision the event to be extravagant. So we would love for folks to kind of roll their sleeves up and join the committee right now. And in addition to that, in November or next month, we're going to kick off our Ed Patillo coat drive. So if there's anybody on the call who would be interested in playing a role and preparing for the coat drive, we will love for you to do that. We also know that Ed, being a former chair of the Ward 7 Dams, he was very instrumental in getting the organization to where it is today. And if there's anyone who wants to make a testimony to recognize Mr. Patillo, we welcome that as well at the event. So at this point in time, that concludes my chairman's report. And I would, at this moment, pass it over to our recording secretary for his secretary's report.
Excellent. Good morning, everybody. My report is a little short today. We moved to approve the agenda last meeting. We also moved to adopt the bylaws as amended. That motion did pass. Mr. Chair, that is my my report from last meeting.
I love it. Okay. Next, we will hear from our treasurer.
We have to,
Sorry.
I move that we approve the minutes from last meeting. Do I hear a second?
Second.
It has been moved and properly second. Are there any questions? Hearing none. Hearing none, then it is approved. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Next, we will hear from our treasurer, Mr. Brandon Scott.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Just touching bases. Hopefully everyone in the ward is doing well. We'll start off with just our general projections, and then we'll move into some actual numbers. So as everyone is aware, we have projected for the course of our, for the year that we will raise, a little tongue-tied there, $25,000 for the year. So we're looking at saving about 15% of that. So in the upper left-hand column or box, you'll see $3,700 is what we are looking at saving as it relates to the entire year. As it relates to operating expenses, we are expecting to spend about $18,000 this year, but we are actually tracking far less than that. So we're doing an outstanding job of being really judicious about our income. Now, when you begin to look at the lower box here, where it talks about account summary, this covers the period from inception, where April 21st, when we took office, through October 21st, which is our current period. You'll see that our current account balance is $5,300. And our checking account, or should I say our savings account, has not yet been opened. That's in the process of being taken care of. As it relates to contributions, we've received an amazing $2,640 in overall contributions from community members and stakeholders or individuals that have contributed as it relates to that we have received. So an outstanding job. With regard to, I think we need to go back one slide here. With regard to Act Blue, Act Blue is our primary donating website. This is how individuals, anyone online or anyone seeing this recording, can actually go in and make and contribute to our site. Now, via that Act Blue, that unique donation site that we have received, individuals upload those monies there. The chart that you're seeing below provides us with a number of contributors. We've had 33 contributors since April through October that have donated via that website. Those contributions have equated to $4,220 that are total contributions that have been received via that site. So that means that on average, everyone is giving $127. Now, typically most Act Blue sites are seeing that their average donation amount is about $60. So we are more than doubling that, really a firm indication that we are propelling ourselves and putting ourselves in a sound financial situation. As it relates to our total overall business expenses, you'll see, excuse me, not expenses, but the executive board fundraising, that the executive board team has collaboratively come together and raised $3,308, collectively adding to our overall total balance to support all of the initiatives that we need here in the ward. Are there any other questions or concerns regarding this? And I'd be glad to take those.
Well, thank you so much for that overview or that presentation or update, Mr. Treasurer. Seeing that there's no questions, we will move to the next slide, please. So do we have Councilwoman Silverman on the line?
Mr. Chair, I do not see her on the line yet.
Okay, let's give her a couple of moments to join the call. So while we wait, Lawrence, if you can play some music, that would be good.
Mr. Chair, this is Sam Rosenamer, her Chief of Staff.
Okay.
She was planning to be on in a few minutes, so I think you could go to the next item. I don't think you should wait for her.
Okay. Okay. Next slide, please. We know that Council Member Silverman will be joining the call shortly. As we wait for her, I just wanted to let folks know that some folks on the call plan to testify at the Ward 7 redistricting hearing that's happening shortly after this call. But I wanted to let folks know that the Ward 7 Dems submitted a testimony. And in the process of submitting the testimony, I just wanted to let folks know, I'm sorry, if you're not speaking, could you mute yourself? Great. So I just wanted to let folks know that even though I submitted or even though the Ward 7 Democrats submitted a testimony, I wanted to share that, make a caveat. These are my initial thoughts during the redistricting process in terms of some of the things that we need to take into account as this process unfolds. And the first thing that comes to mind is just being intentional. We strongly encourage that the redistricting subcommittee is intentional as it relates to what neighborhoods are being added into Ward 7. We have to, or I would strongly encourage them to be considerate of the downstream impact that adding territories may have on civic participation. In addition to that, I want to strongly encourage them to doing this process, they should be mindful not to dilute marginalized communities of color who may already be experiencing low voter turnout. And they should also be mindful of how the redistricting process may potentially impact future elections to come. And last but not least, I would just add, while we are most likely going to extend into Ward 6, which we welcome because we love diversity and inclusiveness. I think the reality is, from my personal perspective, that Ward 5 should not be off the table. So I look forward to making further announcements, or if you haven't planned to do so, please join the hearing in which not only will you hear my testimony, I think what's most importantly is you will hear testimonies from other Ward 7 colleagues. And the beautiful thing about the redistricting process is the fact that everybody has different perspectives that overall contributes to the well-being of our ward. Oftentimes folks hear me say this: a ward divided isn't a ward at all. So it's good that folks have different perspectives, and the redistricting committee has the arduous task of putting all of our inputs together and delivering a Ward 7 that folks would love to see for future generations to come. So I'm excited about this process. This is just a start, but as this process unfolds, I'm gonna need individuals on the call to make your voices heard. And if you don't want to testify at the hearing, reach out to me or other members of the executive team, and we would love to hear from you, because we're going to be pulling on folks when we have our small thinking session groups. So I just wanted to mention that caveat, but other than that, that's all I have. Next slide, please. Okay, so at this moment, I am going to turn the floor over to our first vice chair, Dr. Delia Hasul, and she's going to give a mapping tool, a brief mapping tool demo or presentation.
Awesome. Thank you, Chairman Felder. And definitely want to check in just to make sure. I think my portion will take about 10 minutes or so. Mr. Rosen, do we have enough time to go through this before the council member joins?
That would be perfectly fine. We can, if she's not on in a minute or so, we are more than happy to wait until after your presentation.
Okay.
Sounds like a plan.
Awesome. So that I guess I'll go ahead and get started, and we'll see exactly where she may come in, and we'll just be flexible. Thank all of you for your flexibility. Again, good morning, Ward 7. And before we get started, I know Councilmember Silverman is not on the line, but I would like to thank her for agreeing to just join the call today and share with all of us the importance of redistricting and all the great work that the council is doing to make sure that the community is involved and engaged throughout this process. So this morning, my role here is to just give you a brief overview of the redistricting mapping tool, and to give you a few tips and pointers that I'm hopeful that you can use as you begin to reimagine and re-envision the boundaries in Ward 7 and across the city for yourself. And so here you'll see that there are a couple of links here. I'm going to start by actually going in and I'm going to share my screen here. That's okay. Let me just check in. Oh, I think the councilwoman is on the line. So what I'll do is we're going to let her in, and I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Chairman. And after she speaks, I'll dive right in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, First Vice Chair. Council member, how you doing this morning?
I'm good, Mr. President. I think I am visible on the screen. I can't see myself.
Yes.
But now, oh, there I am. Okay, let me just adjust lighting a little bit. Good morning to the Ward 7 Dems. You guys get going early.
Good morning. Good morning, Councilwoman. How are you?
Excellent. Well, I'm thrilled to be with you today. And Sam Rose and Amy, my chief of staff, is also with you. I'm not sure how thrilled he is because he has a little toddler at home, but we are happy to be with you to talk about redistricting. How much time do I have, Mr. President?
Well, we've dedicated today's meeting specifically to discuss redistricting.
Oh, okay.
Time is needed. You know, our goal is to make sure that folks walk away from this call having a better understanding of the redistricting process, especially since it's moving at such an accelerated rate. So we would, you can have as much time as needed.
Okay. Uh-oh. I'm not sure if that, okay. Not sure if there's a little connectivity issue. Hang on. Let me just switch for 1 second. I'll be back to you in one.
Absolutely.
There we go. Okay, great. So terrific. Well, I am eager to talk with you about the redistricting process, and Ward 7 is going to see some boundary changes. I can say that for sure. So have we shared our screen with Sam for a slideshow?
We're doing
We have
that right now.
Okay, terrific. So I'll just talk a little generally about redistricting. I know we have some folks in Ward 7 Dems who are veterans of the redistricting process and have gone through this several times. For some folks, it might be their first time. So let me just give sort of the foundation of redistricting. So we do redistricting every 10 years. And it's based on the census. And we do that because in the Constitution, there's the 14th Amendment, which has the Equal Protection Clause. And one of the key principles from equal protection is that residents and citizens of the United States have equal representation. And what we interpret that to mean, especially when it comes to local government, is that our political boundaries are drawn in a way that there's sort of an average population in every boundary. So let's talk specifically about our wards. So we have 8 wards, and we want to make sure that each has about the same population. And the reason for that is the one person, one vote principle, that we don't want any specific ward to have more of an outsized voice than another ward. So if a ward was very small, for example, those residents would have a larger voice, so to speak, because there are fewer residents that are represented. So they have the opportunity to sort of have a bigger voice than residents who are in a larger ward. Let's go to the next slide, Sam. So, we can't exactly get to the exact mean or average. The law gives us some flexibility in determining what is equal representation. That's about plus 5 or minus 5% of what's considered the average population. There are some other principles with redistricting too. So we have to do it. So in terms of the timeline, as Wendell said, we are under a different timeline than in past redistricting years because the census was delayed by 5 months. So normally I'd be having this conversation with you in April. We're having it in October because we didn't get the official census numbers till September. So let me talk just generally. So the foundation of redistricting, as we talked about, is one person, one vote, equal representation. But there are some other key principles that guide us as well. I think the next biggest is that, as it says on the slide, no plan can dilute the voting strength of minority citizens. So when we're doing redistricting, we want to make sure that in redrawing the boundaries, we're not reducing the voice or political strength of Black and Latino residents in the city. So that's a key principle. Other key principles that we are sort of embedded in both the federal redistricting guidelines as well as local law is that we want districts to be compact and contiguous. So that means that we don't have some crazy like barbell looking district. And you often associate the term gerrymandering with that. Some of you might be familiar with that term. That's when districts are drawn to meet some kind of political aim. Usually it's partisan in the district, given that we don't have large Republican representation in our city. That's less of an issue, but sometimes gerrymandering happens. As we talked about before, in terms of dilution, people have shenanigans about diluting certain demographic vote. So we want to be very careful that we draw districts that make sense, that are compact and contiguous. Another principle is that we do not split census tracts. We'll get into that in a moment, but this is sort of our way of collecting data through the census, and it's easier when we don't split those tracts. I'm trying to think of the other key, those are some of the, oh, and communities of interest. I knew I was missing one. So we want to make sure we keep together what's called communities of interest. I think in the district, we largely have interpreted that as identifiable neighborhoods. So we don't want to split neighborhoods that have common institutions, let's say schools, in half. It happens, as you know, and we have a lot of people go out of boundary in schools. And I want to be clear that school boundaries do not have anything to do with ward boundaries, but we do try to keep identifiable communities of interest together. So Sam, let's move along to the next slide. Okay, let's talk specifically about the task before us, which is rebalancing our population for equal representation. So these are the official census numbers. As some of you know, we came in the aggregate as a city as a whole, the numbers a little lower than we had projected. So the official census count is 689,545. And the way the principle of equal representation is that we take that number, we divide it by our 8 wards, and we get to the average that we should have for each ward. And actually there is a note that generally is at the, oh, this is table 1. I'm sorry. Sam, let's go to table 4. Or actually, no, let's see. I'm sorry, guys. I admit it's Saturday morning, so I'm a little out of sync.
We get it.
Stay with table 1 for a second. So the point I usually make in table 1, which is key for Ward 7, because we're here talking about Ward 7, is that the city grew at a rate of 14.6%, as you can see. So that's how much the population increased from 2010 to 2020. But each ward grew at different rates. So I want to key in on Ward 7's rate. So Ward 7 grew at 6.3%. The point I want to pause on here is I've heard some folks in our city say that Ward 7 lost population. Ward 7 didn't lose population from 2010 to 2020, and you can see that in the raw numbers before you. But what happened is that it didn't gain population at the rate the city as a whole did and at a rate that other wards did. So, for example, if you take a look at that last column, there's one big number that sticks out at you, 41.9%. Ward 6 grew at 41.9%. And if you think, I see some shaking of the heads, and I know why, and some holding of the heads too. I agree with you. You know, and this is for a larger conversation about where development occurred in our city and where we put economic resources, right? So if you think about Navy Yard, I live at 4th and G Northeast in Ward 6. So I'll tell you, my neighborhood looks nothing like when I bought my house like a decade and a half ago now. If you think about, you know, other Buzzard Point, all those big multi-unit developments in Ward 6, that's what drove that growth. Okay, now we're going to go to table 4, which has the note that I was talking about. So when we divide that 689 number into 8, we get to an average population of 86,193, and that's in that note at the bottom. So in order to meet the equal representation standard, we need to have each ward between 81,883 and 90,503. Those numbers are also in the note below table 4. So what does this mean for Ward 7? Well, as you can see, Ward 7 is currently out of compliance. It is below that range by 5,628 residents. And the reason why I showed you that prior slide is I hope now that makes sense why, because Ward 7 had the slowest rate of growth in our city. So that means that we need to adjust the boundaries so that you guys will be equally represented. Right now, I know it might not feel this way, but according to our Constitution, you have an outsized voice. I know that might not seem the case, but so the reason I started off by saying, I will tell you, we did a Ward 3 hearing yesterday, and I said, well, you're in the bounds, and we didn't have that much interest, I'll tell you, because people figured the boundaries aren't going to change that much. They might change a little bit, but I can tell you with 100% certainty that Ward 7's boundaries are going to change. We absolutely have to do it. It's the law. But let's take a peruse just the numbers for everyone else. There's 2 other wards where there's 100% certainty the boundaries are going to change. And that, as you can see, is in Ward 8, which also had a slow rate of growth. And then as we talked about, Ward 6. So where Ward 7 and 8 is going to need to increase, the boundaries are going to have to change to bring in more residents. Ward 6 is going to need to shrink. Because it is currently above range, as you can see, by 17,699 residents. Sam, let's move along to the next slide. Okay, let's talk a little bit about process. So we are right in the middle of the ward redistricting process. And this is redistricting as a whole is a 2-part process. Some of the veterans might be asking, well, when are the ANC boundaries redrawn? That happens a little later. So it's a 2-part process. So right now we are in the middle of the ward redrawing process. And as you can see, we are going to have your hearing later today. It's going to be a blockbuster Saturday focused on Ward 7 with a little teacher. I think I'm going to something involving teacher voices in between, but I am focused on you guys today. And I hope you are focused on redistricting. Sam told me yesterday, I think we have more than 30 people signed up. And because I know this is of such interest to so many people, if you let us know right now, we can work you in. If you're interested in testifying, please let us know right now. You just email esilverman@dccouncil.us, and I promise I will check my email and we'll fit you in. But as you can see, actually we are about halfway through the ward hearing. So there are a few things. Well, let me go through this and then I'll talk about a few things, principles of our subcommittee, and a few things that are different from prior years. So I think you are the 4th ward hearing. We're having a hearing for every ward this year. And I will say we've had pretty good turnout. As I said, like Ward 3, which is within the range, actually probably one of the wards closest to the mean, didn't have too many witnesses, but we had a ton of witnesses for Ward 8. And Ward 5 actually had good number of witnesses too. So we are trying to get as much input from residents as possible. Redistricting, the actual boundaries are treated like a piece of legislation, like any other piece of legislation, any other bill. So it goes through the legislative process. And we outline that here. So the subcommittee is going to vote on it, mark it up is the language we use in the legislature. And then it moves to the committee of the whole and gets 2 full votes And then the mayor hopefully signs off on it. We probably will move an emergency bill at that second reading once we have really finalized the boundaries. So we can get those boundaries in place for the June 2022 electoral primary, which you've been hearing a lot about because a lot of people have talked about running and have announced their candidacies. Then, as I talked about, it's a sort of bifurcated process. So the second part is the ANC redrawing. And that begins after we complete the ward boundaries, because obviously if the wards change, we can't change the ANCs until then. And that, and Sam has moved to that slide. So your ward member is really key in that process. Councilmember Gray is going to appoint a ANC task force. So if you were interested in this, I would get in touch with Councilmember Gray and his chief of staff, Sheila Bunn, to make sure your interest is known. And that task force, which has representation from at-large members, right, like myself, makes those key decisions and recommendations to bring to the subcommittee. And then there is the same legislative process. Again, there's an urgent electoral urgency to redrawing the boundaries because, as everyone knows, we also have a November 22 general election in which we elect our ANC members. So we need to have the boundaries in place by June so the Board of Elections has what they need to make sure everyone knows where they live. Sam, let's move to the next slide. Okay, great. So we talk, as subcommittee chair, and I always say this was not a position I sought, but I was given this position and I have embraced it in that I want a process that is transparent, that is understandable, that is accessible to everyone, and also that everyone is heard who wants to be heard. Those are, to me, a successful redistricting process will have those 4 components. And I think we are living up to that. I want to thank my subcommittee members, Councilmember Henderson and Councilmember Bonds, who have also embraced this. So there's a few ways in which redistricting this time is different. First, you can make recommendations on how we redraw the lines yourself, actually using a geomapping tool. So what we have before you is a mapping program that is at the website dcredistricting.esriemcs.com. So that website has a program, and the map you see before you is what you will see when you open it up. What it allows you to do is shift the lines, both ward lines, and you'll be able to shift I'm not sure we have the ANC enabled right now, but you'll be able to do that as well. I think we're just focused on wards right now. But what it allows you to do is create your own ward boundaries. So if you are a Ward 7 resident and you have ideas on where the boundaries should expand, you are able to do that with this program and then submit your recommendation to the subcommittee. We've gotten about 80 maps so far. I will tell you that I have looked at a bunch of them at this point. Tomorrow, I'm going to look at every single one of them probably, because we are going to start to look at the subcommittee's recommendations. If I'll just mention 2 other websites. My website has a dedicated redistricting page. So if you're like, when is the Ward 6 hearing, for example, because obviously, let's be for real here. You guys saw the numbers. The wards where redistricting is going to be, the wards that are impacted the most by redistricting are 6, 7, and 8. Because 1 has to shrink, 2 have to grow. Now, that's not to say, let me make a few notes. Ward 2, for those, I'm not good at reading numbers really quickly, but for those who have that skill, you probably noticed that Ward 2 was right at the floor. It's 21 people over the acceptable range. So obviously we have some growth that could happen in Ward 2. I think that was surprising to a lot of people. So I'm not going to say that only 3 wards are going to change. No, I can tell you that more wards will change their boundaries, but I can, as I said before, I can guarantee you that 3 wards will see probably big changes. They're, fairly sizable changes. So if you are interested in the census numbers, I will say we got those numbers from the DC planning website. And I want to thank Director Trueblood and his team, Joy from his team, who've been really great and work partnering with us on the website. Sam, let's go to the next slide. Oh, yes. Okay. So let me talk a little bit, and then hopefully we can open up for discussion, President Felder, if that's okay. So I'll give my second, let's be real. So unfortunately, we're not talking about congressional representation, which is usually the name of the game in redistricting. I'm sure those of you who listen to the radio, read the paper, have heard about, I think, Montgomery County and Prince George's County, their redistricting commissions just presented their plans. Virginia has a big, I think, mess would be a good way of putting it, on redistricting. Virginia, obviously, because the stakes are high, really high in a place like Virginia, where how you redraw population might really impact electoral chances of Democrats and Republicans. So in our city, I think the stakes are a little different. I think first, and I do not want to shortchange people's ward and neighborhood identity. I think in our city, and I know very strongly in Ward 7, people have very strong identity and association with their neighborhoods and with the ward itself. So when you see a boundary changing and you're the one impacted by that boundary change, I know that there's real sentimental and emotional connection to it. So I do not diminish that. Second thing is parking, as we have on the slide. So right now, as you know, parking is generally attached to wards. That's not true everywhere because of prior redistrictings, where we allowed those who saw a boundary shift to continue to park in their old ward. I think this hasn't been as big an issue for Ward 7 as it is perhaps for some other wards, although it will become, I think when we see the boundaries change, it might. So I will say that there are 2 more things about parking. First, my subcommittee member, Councilmember Henderson, has some very, very strong feelings about what we should do on parking. And she has introduced a bill to represent those feelings she has, which is to separate the ward boundary from the your RPP parking privileges, and to get it more down. I think it's to the ANC level. So that is a bill that will be considered. I think Councilmember Che, who's head of the Transportation Committee, says she'll have a hearing on it, but that is not going to be resolved before we get done with redistricting in December. So what I will say is likely what is to happen is people will be able to retain their historic parking privileges, let's say pre 2021 parking privileges. The third thing I want to talk about is race. So race is integral to our city, and talking about electoral power and power, I think we cannot ignore this issue. And what I've said, because Ward 7 and 8 are majority Black population wards, Ward 6 a majority white population ward. And when I reread some of the discussion in 2011 about redistricting, I'll just be quite honest with you, I was disturbed by what people were saying. And I guess what I have said in every hearing, and I'll say it today, is that I don't want to have any dog whistling or racist comments made about why someone can't live in this ward or is not part of the culture of this ward, and any of this, I would say, not so subtle language. I hope we can talk about demographics and race and how it might factor into redistricting in a sort of honest, genuine, civil way. Because it, I think we can't ignore it. It is a factor, and we should deal with it. I think in a honest way. I know it's sometimes difficult in council hearings or in Ward 7 Democrat meetings in public settings where you have like a multi-race audience to talk really, genuinely and honestly about it. But that is what I hope to do here in redistricting. So that said, I think those are all the basics. I guess I'll make one more plug. Our hearing on Ward 7 starts at 1 o'clock, and I saw somebody put a helpful note in about where to email if you're interested in testifying. And I will just look at these chat notes because I see somebody has some questions. So why don't we, I'm going to kick it back, and I apologize, I kind of zoomed in. Are you in charge, President Felder, or
Yes,
is somebody, Ms. Taylor, running this? Or?
So members of the team, they're running this point in terms of screen sharing capabilities.
Okay.
So first and foremost, I appreciate you with that robust and informative presentation. Hopefully you provided clarity on a couple of outstanding questions. However, at this moment, we want to open the floor to the audience to ask you questions. And then following that, I have a few questions myself I would like to ask you. So at this point in time, I want to turn it over to our Sergeant at Arms, who typically handles the question portion after a guest speaker comes to our meeting. So Ms. Tiffany Brown.
Sure. I think it's Daphne Appoint. She had her hand up first. You may unmute and ask your question.
I see Daphne's hand up, and I see Daphne had a question in the chat. So I'll address, maybe while you're unmuting, Daphne, I'll address your question in the chat and see if that is your question. So what I'm saying is, yes, so if you are currently zoned for Ward 7, you will be able to still keep your Ward 7 parking. I think what we've done in the past, and this might be true in Kingman Park, is there creates a Ward 6-7 parking where those who, Kingman Park was previously Ward 6, so they were allowed to both have their Ward 6 parking, and now they're in Ward 7. I think we'll probably do some kind of what I would say would be interim solution like that until Councilmember Henderson's bill gets a full legislative process and we sort of resolve how we want to move forward on parking in the future. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay, now I'm going to call on First Vice Chair, Dr. Halseal. She can't raise her hand because she's a co-host, and then I'm going to go in order as I see them.
Thank you. Thank you again, Council Member Silverman. That was a really robust and thorough discussion. I have my first question is, as the council considers rebalancing the district's population, I know that, you referenced a list of core principles, many of which are really based on the law, some of those things. So just wondering if the council is willing or will be considering a set of principles and values in which it could use as a framework to make some of its decisions. And the reason why I ask is because I think it's important, particularly important given the comment that was made around, the race discussion and how that might be very contentious. And so it could be helpful for the council to consider adopting principles and values such as diversity, inclusion, and some of those things, as it, makes its decision-making process. So I am looking to testify this afternoon, so definitely will share more about that, but just eager to hear whether or not you all have considered that at all.
Great, thank you so much. And that's a great question. So I've gotten this question several times, and here's what I will say is that I actually reread DC Code last weekend. It's been a bunch of fun weekends for me about redistricting. And a lot of those core principles are embedded in our local law, and I think people just don't realize it. So I think we will probably release something that outlines, what are those key principles. But what I'm hearing in your question is also, and again, this is my effort to really talk genuinely, what about racial equity? Is that a component here? Okay, good. See some head shaking.
Absolutely.
So we have included the Council's Office of Racial Equity in this process. We are working with them. And they are certainly involved. The other thing I will say is that in the effort of being transparent and accessible, I will say there is a high probability at this point we are going to release maps before the last hearing and probably before the last few ward hearings. I didn't want to do it at the beginning, I will tell you, because I'm still absorbing what everybody, all the input. But one of the things I heard from residents is we don't like to be surprised. Basically I'll be candid with you now that we're like a month and a half into this process. There are a few basic moves, so to speak. There's, looking at all of our general principles. There are a few boundary decisions that are like, there are a few options, I would say, that in the end, I think we'll see people coalesce around, and we're starting to see that in the map submissions. So I'm going to likely release like 3 draft maps for people to comment on, and they'll probably represent what I see as those 3 options that people have coalesced around the most. So I'm probably broadening more than your question, but I will say more on racial equity, and that I know there's a lot of hope for redistricting. One way we could do redistricting would be to totally upset the apple cart. And as some of you know, I'm someone who generally is an out of the box thinker and doesn't mind doing that. But I will say, after 20 months of COVID, I think this is probably not the time to do a completely radical approach that would really upend like our city, because our city's being so upended as it is. I know people's frustration with that 41.9% growth in Ward 6 and the 6.3% growth in Ward 7. But I will say that I think the way to deal with it is for us to really talk honestly about those numbers and start driving economic development in a way that the Ward 7 community wants it to Ward 7. Because I don't think redistricting is going to solve all those problems. I know that I went a little larger than your question, but along with those maps, we probably will release here are the guiding principles, which I think is probably the answer to your question. Sorry for the long-winded answer.
No, that was perfect, actually. Thank you. Appreciate all your responses.
Okay, the next 2 questions, one from Ambrose Lane first, and then Dorothy Douglas.
Good morning, Councilmember Silverman. How are you? Good to see you again.
Good.
And notwithstanding your comments about race and equity, and the comments that were just made about economic development, recently Councilmember Pinto introduced the Recovery Act Amendment of 2021 to deal with recovery in downtown DC and the Golden Triangle. And my comments to that were that, yeah, sure, we definitely want the district to have economic viability, but where's the Recovery Act for Ward 7 and Ward 8? We need a Recovery Act as well for the businesses that we need and things like that. So I'll get to my question, and my question is centered around its impact of redistricting on the budget. And what I mean by that is simply this: as neighborhoods absorb other neighborhoods in the redistricting process, as you know, the numbers, the measurement numbers of certain things change. So for example, if Ward 8 has, say, a diabetes rate of 19% and it absorbs Navy Yard, which are going to be people that are healthier and more affluent, then that diabetes rate might drop. And that has an impact on the budget, which means that the Department of Health might look at that and say, well, there's been a reduction of the diabetes rate in Ward 8, the new Ward 8. And similarly in Ward 7 and other wards. And so how would the council deal with that? Because what that could mean is that there will be less money put towards addressing the diabetes rate because those numbers change due to redistricting. And you can go across the board in the measurements of other things, not just in health, but in education, in economic development. And so as the physical numbers change, the measurement numbers change as well. And how would the council deal with that part of equity?
Right. So you bring up an excellent point, Ambrose, and it's sort of like two sides of the coin. Because when I met with your colleagues in Ward 8 Dems last week, some people were saying to me, well, move the boundaries so we can get more of those supermarkets in our ward. And I was saying, well, we can do that, but it doesn't change the fact that if somebody in Congress Heights is having difficulty getting to the Harris Teeter and Navy Yard, just because we shift the ward boundaries, it's not going to make it any easier for them to get to that supermarket. The transit equity and food insecurity issues aren't going to go away. But you make kind of the flip side of that point, which is if we add, let's say, a more affluent Navy Yard, it's whiter, more affluent population, is that going to mask some of the issues or make it seem like we're making more progress than they really are? That's where I'd say, so I'm trying to think of where we do budgeting. I mean, we don't really do a lot of like ward specific budgeting. That's where I would say, and somebody asked me about the core principles again, to name those. That's where the census tract. So one of the core principles of redistricting is try not to split census tracts. That's because the census tract, that's like geographic area, is how we measure various things. And so you're still going to see in those census tracts, for example, in Ward 7, where there's high poverty, the high poverty is going to remain in those areas. It's just that, other more affluent areas have been included in the Ward 7 boundaries. I'm trying to come up with, so I guess what I would say is you're right. We want to make sure that we're addressing the real needs of the ward. And I think that's where we're just going to have to, again, I think speak honestly and genuinely about, well, with the Ward 7 boundaries redrawn, we've included other affluent area, more affluent areas, which will make it look like poverty is decreasing in the ward where it really isn't. And I think we just have to be cognizant of that. I mean, one thing I'm going to keep emphasizing is Ward 7 needs to grow. Now, how we grow is the key question that I want input from you guys, because there's not one answer. There's the answer that we've done in the past, I will say, which is Ward 7 grew across the river, right? So the river is a natural boundary, which makes it easy to say, oh, we should, not cross it. But somebody's going to have to cross the river, I will say. It's either going to be Ward 7, Ward 8, or both, because as you know, the two wards east of the river are the ones that have to grow population. So somebody's going to come across. But I went beyond your answer and your question, and I want to make sure we get in all the questions. So I'll stop there. And if someone wants to pursue this, I'm happy to keep talking about it.
And I would just say, council member, we're going to take two more. Ambrose, you can respond in 1 second. We're going to take 2 more questions from the audience. And I just have a couple of questions, because we do want to be mindful that you probably need to get your mind right for this hearing. And that's
oh yeah, that's true.
Yes. So Ambrose, you can respond if you would like. But other than that, we're going to take the 2.
No, not really. She understands the points that I'm making, and I know that she's very cognizant of these issues. And I'm grateful for that. I'm not going to respond because there's others that want to ask their questions. So thank you for your thoughtfulness, Councilmember.
I try. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Douglas, and then Keith Tyree, you will have the last question.
Good morning, and everybody, and thank you so much for being here, Ms. Silverman. It's great to see you again. My question is, I know the boundaries are changing, and you say that ANC boundaries will be changing in the near future or few months. My concern is that the boundaries are already set for the ANCs, and what the issues are is that other commissioners are in which the boundaries lay out where each single member district is elected to. But what happens is that it goes into another commissioner's boundaries, and it get involved in development and whatever there is without notifying that commission and to give input that's impacting the single member district commissioner, which affects those residents there. I think the law is already in effect. We need to see that law, and I think Gottlieb, before he retired, had that information. I would like for that law and those regulations to be clear to the community, because they're having issues. The commissioners are coming into other commissioners' boundaries, and that would they have the same issues with this changing too? And I think we need to clarify that so we can have smooth communication and smooth development and whatever process that we want to have for that single member district residents and for the residents. And I want to thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. And I think so clearly with the growth of Ward 7, we're going to create more ANCs. And I think through the ANC process, we will talk about the issues. The ANC redrawing process will talk about, the importance of ANCs. One key issue we have before us that my colleagues and I need to decide is we have grown. By statute, ANCs are political districts or electoral districts of 2,000 people. So we have a choice whether we want to increase the number of ANCs. Ward 7 is definitely going to have more ANCs because you have to grow population, as we said, for equal representation. But across the city, we have to decide, given we've seen growth across the city, whether we want to increase the number of ANCs or increase the size. So we'll be talking more about that starting in December.
Well, I hear you talking about it, Ms. Councilmember, but it's already in effect. And I think that the issue needs to be shared with the residents as we speak now. So that's what I'm saying to you. I'm aware there's going to be an increase, but they said the documents is available. So I'm asking that those documents and those laws to be provided so that we all can be on the same page and not interfere for something that's incorrect, that would have not a great impact on the community. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Tyree?
Thank you. Good morning, Ward 7. Good morning, Councilmember. How are you doing today?
Good. How are you?
Good. My comment is related to the submission of the maps and the traditional splitting of census tracts that we've been seeing a while in the city. Will your committee only be taking maps that are created from the redistricting only to? And I ask this because I understand that we shouldn't split census tracts, but every redraw since the 1990s, we have split census tracts. And I just don't want us to be at a disadvantage if we need to actually articulate exactly where we would like to see our boundaries for our wards.
Are you a cartographer, Mr. Towery, or
not at all?
Oh, okay.
I'm a data nerd and geek, so I just.
Okay, well then that makes sense. Because usually we don't get too many questions about split census tracts. So you make an excellent point. So, it is a principle, and it is in the law, local law, to avoid doing this. It's not an absolute no. So you are correct. We have done this in the past. And so let me answer all your questions. We will take other maps. They don't have to be from the program. Some people have had difficulty using the program. So if you want to submit a map to us that's not from the program, that's fine. If you want to submit a map that has a split census tract, that's fine too. It would be helpful. There is in the program, you can explain your reasoning. like I made this move and I made this move. For example, one of the people who testified in Ward 5, his map is in my mind. He called it like the make not too many changes map or something. And so he said, you know, my guiding philosophy here was that I don't want to make too many changes. I want to meet the requirements of the law, and here's what I did. That would be helpful. I will say that the committee is looking to correct or reunite some of those census tracts, because I do think it helps with data collection, and the issue that Ambrose identified which is it does sort of for data collection purposes, it is more helpful to keep those census tracts together. But we definitely will take your recommendation, split census tracts or not. I think I answered everything you
I think so.
asked.
I guess,
Great.
you know, the other comment I would just say to that too is the census tracts are cool. Like, I think like when we talk about just the level of maintaining data, it's really easy to look at a census tract. But if we do have to split the census tract, we have blocks. And it's more difficult for people to argue about splitting a census block, right? Because that's the localist that you can get. So at least maybe if we can provide you with the block information, I think splitting a census tract is okay.
Sure.
If we are still systematic in our approach.
And for those who aren't data nerds like myself, actually one of my colleagues, Councilmember Che, asked me this question, like, why do we have this in the law? And I had to like go back and like give her a good answer. But just for everyone's information, so when you look at the maps and when you see them on the screen, they're going to be divided by ward. And then I think there's gray lines around it that will show the wards, and there are black lines that will show the census tracts. And then as Mr. Towery said, there's a even more granular level called census blocks. And those are sort of the different ways in which we collect information. Let's say how many white residents there are, how many black residents there are. We can do it by those different geographic lines. Just so everyone, we're all on the same page here about the discussion. Great, Mr. Felder, ready for your questions.
Yes, I appreciate you, Councilmember.
Don't make them too tough.
No, I have just a recommendation from Sam or from your office. I think that we know today's hearing is today. And we want to be able to make sure that folks, if they can't testify, they have an opportunity to testify later on, as well as if as this process continues to unfold, they're going to have a better understanding of the mapping process. Can you ask Sam, or can I work with Sam or your office just to get those timelines to make sure that we submit testimonies or maps in addition to today's hearing?
Sure, I'm going to see if, so we have two different presentations, sort of one for the community and one for the hearing, just so if you go to the hearing, you don't have the same boring presentation. But I'm going to see if Sam has the chart that has the hearing schedule, because I want to point out to you that there's going to be one wrap-up hearing. So we work with every ward member to determine what day was good for them. So Councilmember Gray and his office wanted to have a weekend hearing. So that's why we're having the hearing today. November 5th is going to be sort of the come one, come all. And I will say at that point, it is likely that there it is. Okay, so this is the hearing schedule. We actually go in ward order, so it's not in date order. But as you can see, the final bullet is that final citywide hearing, November 5th at noon. So definitely everyone can testify at that. I will say I would say above 90% certainty, you will see some draft maps by then. But for example, if you can't, you got soccer, kids have soccer today, or you go into the movies or whatever, hopefully fun Saturday plans you have. You can't make today, you could also come to the next hearing on, I'm trying to find where our next hearing is, on Monday. You could come to Ward 2's hearing and just say, you know, I just couldn't make the Ward 7 hearing. And we're largely focused on Ward 2, but I want to talk about Ward 7. So you can go to another Ward's hearing, you can go to the wrap-up hearing, you can just submit testimony to us. Either by email or by voicemail if you don't have email access. Probably everyone on this Zoom call does, is my guess. So there are many ways to participate, and as well, you can submit your map through the program.
I appreciate that.
We'll leave that, maybe we'll leave that hearing date, Sam, if you want to leave that hearing date up, just so people can write that down, the
I
dates
appreciate
down.
that, Councilwoman. Two questions, one final questions, and I'll let you go. They may be a little harder.
Oh, shoot.
From overseeing this process, as well as being a at-large councilwoman, from the information that you've discovered thus far, would you be able to say, from your perspective, why do you think Ward 7 and 8 has grown the least in population? Yes, I'll stop there.
Sure. I mean, I wouldn't say this from redistricting, but I think we can see it is about where the city has put resources into economic growth. Specifically about Ward 7, as an at-large member, I will say, I think Ward 7 presents one of the more interesting communities in terms of economic growth, because I think a lot of residents have moved to Ward 7 because it provides, and I hope no one takes offense to this, a more suburban experience, so to speak. People want a yard, people want a single family home, people want, don't want to live in as dense a community. So I think that presents some issues that there's not, and I know this has been an effort by Councilmember Gray. Obviously Ward 2 has daytime population, has a lot of offices. And when we're talking about economic development, that helps drive economic development, right? When you have a mix of residential and commercial. And I think Ward 7 has, a challenge there, since it's largely a residential community. I mean, the third, I got to say, is structural racism. I think that is a factor and we can't ignore it. And that Ward 7 is a predominantly Black community. And we see in Ward 7 and 8, we just haven't seen the development and resources go into Ward 7 and 8 that we have seen in more whiter part wards. I'm just going to speak plainly. And I think we need to address that. And I guess what I would say is, to Ambrose's point that he brought up earlier, I know that, certainly, and Councilmember Che actually pushed this issue with me yesterday, can we use redistricting? And Delia, I think, Ms. Hasil pushed this issue, how do we use redistricting to push our racial equity values? But I think, it is not a cure-all. And, obviously I have a self-interest in saying that, and that I'm in charge of redistricting, and I don't want to put like this tremendous expectation on it. But I think we really have to talk more about how do we drive development that is what the Ward 7 community wants, and is going to be helpful for the ward, because I think there is some tension there.
Agree. And my final question, Council Member, is, which is a good segue. Your comments is a good segue to my final question. How do you prioritize all of this information that's coming to you? Obviously, the boundary wards or the adjacent wards are going to have the things that they want to see, as well as Ward 7, and then the different things from the various stakeholders in Ward 7. The desires are going to vary. How is your office, as well as the redistricting committee, prioritizing what comes first, or who are you listening to the most?
These are good questions.
I'm sorry.
So I will say, as is obvious, I speak with candor. Redistricting impacts the entire city, but it mostly is it's going to impact the most Wards 6, 7, and 8. So as I said, we're having a hearing for every single ward, but I have put, and Sam, who is leading our staff redistricting efforts, we have put efforts into doing outreach in 6, 7, and 8. It's not that I'm not going to speak to Ward 4, but they're going to be less impacted. So we're putting less of an emphasis on outreach, I will say. And let me speak for about outreach. So one of the other things we're doing differently is I asked the chairman for an outreach budget, and it was a long time coming, but we finally got it. And the reason I asked him for that is not everybody's on Zoom, not everybody, communicates by email or, TikTok or these things that even I'm too much of an oldster for. So we want to do some flyering. And we want to focus on neighborhoods where are likely to either be impacted themselves in a shift or neighbor a shift, which is probably more the case in Ward 7. So we are working with Councilmember Gray and Sheila Bunn in his office to get recommendations on who we need to talk to and who can help us get the word out, because I am concerned about our seniors and others who might not be, social media might not be their first place to go to get information. We're going to be putting ads in the community newspapers. I will say I am thrilled that we finally got the money. I wish it had come a little earlier because we're a little limited in what we can do with it. But I hope I'm answering your question, Wendell, which is to say that, strategically, we are focused on 6, 7, and 8. I'll just be honest about that. And a little bit Ward 2, I will tell you, because as I said, Ward 2 just got above that line and it neighbors Ward 6. So it's likely to see some impacts as well. It's another place where we could see a boundary move. And so that's our approach. And as I said, I think in the end, now that we're in it and we've gotten the maps and we've heard from about half the wards in these hearings, there are certain, like I'll tell you, in Ward 6, Southwest has said to me, look, we understand we might have to see a boundary shift, just don't move half our neighborhood. Use the principle of communities of interest to consider us a community of interest. And so if you're going to shift the boundaries, shift all of us, don't shift half of us. So those are the kinds of things that were helpful to hear, honestly.
Yes,
And yeah, I don't want to go on and on, but we're listening to you in every way we can possibly do that.
I would just wrap this up in 10 seconds, and then I see a hand raise. If you have the time, Councilwoman, if not, we completely understand. I think that I appreciate your response. I would just also add, we do have, or from the Ward 7 Dems perspective, we know that there's been conversations about ranked choice voting and the redistricting processing happening at this simultaneously can be a lot to digest for Ward 7. So we just want to be mindful of those things in this process as well, even though they're not related, they're indirectly related. So I just want to thank you for that. So that concludes my questions. If you have time to answer one more question, if not, I completely understand. We have enjoyed you.
If there's a burning question, I'm happy to answer, or a not so burning question, I'm happy to answer it.
Okay, I'm taking you have the floor for the last question, and then we're gonna let the councilwoman take a snack break, and we'll see her at 12:30.
Yeah, just one thing, council member. District agencies measure things differently. So, for example, the Department of Health, and in terms of their health equity report, they use the 51 statistical neighborhoods. They don't necessarily correspond to the census tracts. And even MPD has a different measurement in terms of how they categorize communities. Can we get on one accord where we're measuring using the same daggone thing? Where so when you're talking about these statistics that we just mentioned earlier that change, it's hard when one agency is using one set of boundaries and another agency is using another set of boundaries, and we're using census tracts. This makes it very difficult. So that's all.
I agree with you. I as a council member, as a member of the legislature, we could pass a law saying all the agencies have to use census tracts as the data collection piece. I mean, MPD, I think almost everyone says, why do we have 7 districts? Why are the MPD districts different than like the wards? And it's so confusing. I mean, part of that is probably for historic reasons, and that the boundaries do shift as we're going to do now. But I agree with you. I will say, you know, we can think about that. I mean, that's why Mr. Towery's question was so good, because now we want to be a data-driven government, right? So we don't want to have like 5 different data collection sets. We want to have one which we all understand and then can work off of. So you make a great suggestion. I hadn't thought about that. I will say that I'm on the legislative side, the executive is on the implementation side. So it would be great if the mayor said, you know what, this is crazy. We need to have one data collection set. But let's work on that together. But it does make things confusing. I agree with you. Well, should I just wrap up and say thank you? Thank you, Ward 7 Dems. It's great to be, you know, as an independent, sometimes I don't get invited to Democratic partisan events. So it's a thrill to be with you. I know you know, I love all the wards, but I know Ward 7 Dems is a very active organization. So it was really key for us to come before you today. I, you know, encourage everybody who can testify today to testify. As I said, you will be impacted in Ward 7, and we really want to hear from you where those boundaries should grow. And if you have any questions, you can feel free to email either me or Sam, Rose, and Amy on my staff, and we will try to help you as best we can. And thank you guys so much. And thank you let me give a shout out to, is it President Felder? Am I using the correct title here? Because Wendell really, like, once redistricting happened, he's like, you gotta come and talk to my group. So, you know, we wanna know, we wanna be involved. So thank you for giving us that invitation.
Even though you're an independent councilwoman, you're always invited to the Ward 7 Democrats organization. So we appreciate you, as well as Sam. Thank you for supporting your boss. And with that being said, we'll let you go and we'll see you shortly.
Okay, see everybody at 1 o'clock. Take care.
So next on the agenda item, we're going to go ahead and allow our first vice chair, Dr. Hasil, to resume with her redistricting map presentation.
Awesome. Thank you, Chairman Felder. So I'll try to make this as easy to understand as possible. And actually just want to encourage folks, there are a lot of resources out there available to you. There is a YouTube video that actually provides a very thorough training around how to use the tool. We'll be sharing that link shortly as well. So just given the lack of time, I am going to go ahead and dive in. So let me share my screen here. All right. I think the first thing is for you to actually access the link that takes you to the redistricting tool, and we will drop that in the chat for those of you who may be interested in just following along. So here's the landing page for the tool. Obviously, what you want to do first is go in and create an account. So if you have not done so already, please create an account. Even if you are, don't plan on making a map, I would still recommend creating an account because you can go in and see all of the other plans that have been made publicly available. So you'll at least be able to go ahead and see some of those plans. So I've already have an account, so obviously it's automatically logging me in here. So this is what you'll see when you first enter the tool. There are 2 things that you can do when it says choose a template plan. Never, ever, ever, and again, I'm gonna give you guys just really high level tips. When you see this landing page here, definitely recommend against selecting blank template. If you select a blank template, it is what it says it is, and that is a blank template, which means there are no predefined census geographies, and it's just very difficult to use. So I always recommend that, and the district actually set this up for us, which is great. Clicking here what they call the starting template. Here, this template already has the geographic boundaries assigned. They also have the census tracts. They have the blocks and a lot of great demographic information. So for those of you who may be trying to follow along, I guess I'm gonna slow it down a little bit. So I'm gonna click here with the starting template. All right, and so this is what you will see when you first enter the tool. This is our starting template. I'm going to quickly go over just some of the main things on the template. On the first ribbon here, you'll see your files. On the file tab, this is where you can do some saving and things. I'll talk about that later. The Learn tab is just some additional resources. Like I mentioned, you can click on all of these and it'll take you to the various resources to help you learn how to use the plan. We also have the View tool. Here is where you could just assign, if you know you like different colors, you want to play around with the colors, you can do that. But as you see here, they've already assigned some colors to each ward. So my recommendation is just to keep it simple and leave what they've already developed for you. Then you have the tool that really means the most, and that's the Create tool, and I'll get back to that shortly. You have your Review tool, which allows you to review your map or provide a high-level summary of your maps after you have started the creation process. The Share button allows you to share your plan either internally with groups that you create or externally. And then last is your Submit plan, and this is where the plan actually goes directly to the DC Council. Some other things, let's go back to View. Some other things that are important to note here, I want to make sure I capture everything, is that you'll see that you already have some predefined numbers located here. These numbers are based off of the current census tract numbers. Ambrose, I'm going to definitely get to you. Thank you. If you want to put it in the chat as well, we can get to that as well. The lines that you see are actually census tracts. So these tracks are already predefined for you. And I'll get into that when we start creating. And then the table that I really wanted to bring your attention to is down here. So this table basically describes what the current population's totals are, target deviation. So these numbers come from, I think what Councilmember Silverman mentioned, that, you know, based on the census data, the target population for each ward is about 86,193. So this number represents how far away or over the population is, and it also gives you a good indication of what needs to change. Now, we do build into, or we take into account what they call a 5% variance, either up or down, which means that the average range for each ward should be no less than 81,883 and no more than 90,503. And these numbers are very important because once you start making your map, in order to make sure you have a viable map, you want to make sure that you stay within the ranges of those targets. As you create your map, these things will change. Just for the sake of time, I'm gonna take questions at the end. I don't want to, I'm gonna kind of just plow through this really quickly. So let's get into what we are all here. And again, this is not designed to be a very intensive training. I just want to give you a great high-level overview and hopefully provide you with some tips and tools that will make it really easy for anyone to kind of pick up and develop a map. So again, the most important tool here is the Create tab. The first thing you see here is district. You can assign your district to either, you know, to any ward, and we'll talk about what this means a few. But when you look at this ribbon here, some of the things that I think are most important, I mean, there's lots of tools here, but these buttons here allow you to actually start creating your map. The one that is my go-to button is this first one, which is where you select the geography by picking it. And so that one, I mean, you also have this tool here where you can select the geography by creating a rectangle. And then you could, you know, they also have other tools that you can select your geographies by polyline. The reason why I recommend against these three is because it really makes it difficult for you to make sure that your plans are aligned with some of the principles that Councilmember Silverman mentioned around making sure that to the extent possible, you're drawing your boundaries aligned with census tracts. If you absolutely feel like you want to break up a census tract into a group, the tool does allow you to do that, but you can only really do that when you are selecting a geography by picking it instead of just drawing a box or a polyline or something of that nature. So for people who just want to get in and get started, again, I'm going to recommend that you use this first button here. Other important buttons are on this is your pan tool. The pan tool allows you to just do exactly that, just move around, or, sorry, I zoomed in, but it allows you to move your map around, especially if you just want to put emphasis on a particular board. Another important tool is this eye in a circle. I call it the identify feature. This allows you to, if you want to click on a particular area, let me click on it and get some information. So let's click here. It'll highlight the area. And again, this is at the census tract level. So it highlights the census tract. And then here I can tell what the actual census tract name is. You want to go with your last 3 digits. So this is, 4 digits. This is tract 6804. And then you can also add other things here around, like you'll see population statistics and things of that nature, which I didn't really go through. Sorry about that, but I'll get back to that. So again, I like to use this tool because it helps you to understand, like, hey, what's the makeup, geographic makeup of a particular area? What is this particular tract? You'll see here, this change 602, or this one here is 7901. And you'll see what level you're in by here. You'll see it says display level tract. If you want to get even further down, you now see blocks. So you can look into here and you'll see the different block levels. So, and actually you can see the blocks within here as well. So for example, even though this highlights census tract 7901, see that there's 4 block groups within that tract. Another important piece on this row is your base map. You can change this to kind of sort of be at the street level. I like the street level, but sometimes it is helpful to rotate between what we call the imagery level that has labels. So certain things are kind of highlighted. That makes it very easy for you to also understand. Again, your lines are still here. When you pan out, you still see those tracks. And if you pan in a little bit, you can see those tracks a little better. This does make it a little difficult to see the tracks. So sometimes, it may be helpful to just start at the street level and then, rotate back and forth. So that's just an overview. I am going to show you what it looks like to start creating, which is the fun part. So as I mentioned earlier, you want to make sure that you select a geography. Let's say that if I think we want to expand over here into Ward 6, which we know are some areas that need to expand. And the map isn't, it's kind of funny with the view. So you want to try to close things down as much as possible so that you can really just focus in on your map. So I selected the pointer here. What you have to make sure you do in the district map, if you want to expand Ward 7, here you want to say, I'm going to focus on expanding Ward 7. So I'm going to change my district to Ward 7. I have my pointer here. I'm going to double click here. This adds this census tract and all of the blocks, right, to Ward 7. Other things that you will notice changes when I do that is the population changes. So now, given Ward 8 more folks, it's 80,000. One of the things that you also want to watch for, and I know this is just, this whole racial equity, is watch how the population shifts, right, as you do that. So I'll show you, I'll give you another example. So we have that here. I'm going to try to keep both up. So I'm going to also add this census tract, the entire tract right here, which is also in Ward 6. As I added it, so you should see Ward 6 population decline. Ward 7 population has now increased. Demographics have also shifted a bit as well. So you can keep, and so that's basically how you add people. Let's say if we want to go after we want to add some more waterfront to Ward 7. So we can click here. And now we've added that as well. Our population has again gone up to 82,000 and Ward 6 has shifted down. Remember what our target number that we're looking for is around that 86,000. So you can keep moving and planning until you get to whatever number you want. I will say that even though we are looking to, for a population of around 86 cents and change, you also want to take into consideration future population growth. So you want to make sure, you know, that to the extent possible, you probably need to go a little bit even over that 86,000. But I don't want to get into that discussion. So this again is how you make the changes to the map. Once you make your changes, again, you could start saying, let me look at this base map and see what's over here. So you could zoom in, right? And again, because of the way its map is, you might want to move some stuff down and around. Now I'm able to zoom in. Need to make sure I go back, take it off of this now and click pan because I'm just moving around, taking a look at things. So I'm just panning around and look to see what I've included and all of that good stuff. So that's how you do that. You can zoom in even further. If you want to take a look at the geography, let me go back to the streets where you can actually see the streets and that sort of thing. So that is that. I'm going to address one more question. If you wanted to, if you say, you know what, I want to kind of split some of these up. I don't want to necessarily, you know, and again, it's not recommended that you split those tracks up. If you absolutely feel like you want to split a track up, you can split it up by group. You would do the same thing. You would hit geography, and then you would just click one little, I'm sorry, that's already Ward 7. All right, you would go in and so now you could see, even though the tracks, I can see the groups. So I'm just going to do this group within the track. And did it do it for me? Sorry, this thing is a little fickle sometimes. Did the whole track for me. This is another handy to undo. If you do something that you didn't want to do, you can undo it. So let me see if I can get this one to work for us. There we go. Okay. So yes, it just did a part of a track. And again, you could always look here and click on it and just see what's happening here. So that's how you start creating. I'm gonna go back here to pan because I want to make sure I'm able to move around. That's how you are creating your maps. So once you've created your map, I'm gonna move along just for a check of time. Once you've created your map, you can go in and review your map, right? Some of the things that I like about this is, let me pause and see if there's any relevant questions. Okay. This question, how did you select the census tract, the one with the yellow border? Okay, so on the create tab, again, you use this pointer here and you can, again, these are the tracks, these natural lines that you see, and you just double click. Remember, it's Ward 7 here. And then you click it. No idea why it keeps wanting to zoom in when I click. Okay, and then now it's selected a track where I can click here. There we go. That track has been selected. And it zooms in naturally and you see now we've gone a little bit too far with 92. So I may want to give Ward, if I want to, let me show this as well. If I want to give Ward 6 back something, I'll click 6. Then I'll say, you know what, let's put that back. Here we go. So we've added that back for them. So that's how you select a census tract. And as I mentioned, you can also select blocks within tracks. As you can see, this yellow thing selected here. It is a whole track, but I only selected one block within that track. On the review tab, the thing that I love here is you can kind of sort of see the distribution of different variables, particularly the demographic variable here, and it'll tell you how geographically balanced your map is across the different wards. This one is kind of a little off, you can see, but that's because of the way my numbers are situated here. You could also look at how district is, you know, if you want to look at Ward 7 and see what the distribution of race is based on your map, you can click here. You can see what it looks like. As you can see, we've given our population a little bit more diversity, which is always a great thing by some of the changes that we propose. All right, so that's that one. This is also important, the integrity check. You will not be able to submit your map if it doesn't pass the check. When we click check, it's going to do an automatic check. These are checking for the same values, right, that Councilmember Silverman mentioned, such as the maximum deviation. Remember, you can't have a population that's above or below a certain threshold. The map doesn't meet that, so guess what? It's going to give us an X. If you click details, it'll tell you what to fix. A connectivity check also means that you can't have your map needs to be contiguous, right? You can't skip. Can't say I want a part of Ward 7 to be over here if it's not connected to something else over on this side. So that's the reason why I'm sure it's not contiguous, because of probably, it could be because of, let's see, probably is because of what we've done here, actually. So let me do this really quickly and give this back to 6. Okay. And now let's run. I'm going to do that again. I know we're running out of time here. Oh, it's probably not going to meet the deviation either, because I didn't, our population still. Yeah, so there's a couple of issues I know I could fix, but I for the sake of time, we don't want to do that. The deviation is still off on some of these because the populations are not being met, like Ward 7 is too low. We didn't even tackle Ward 7. But anyway, I just wanted to show you that. Another good feature is your report feature. You can click different reports. So let's go back here really quickly. Sorry to rush. These are all the different reports. I love the build text, because what the build text does is it shows you what census tracts and block groups are in your particular map. This is an example of what that report looks like. So you can look and say, oh, okay, this is what we have here. And there's also other reports that you can extract that show your population summary. Here's an example of that here based on your plan. And so, yeah, that's that. And then you can also share your plan, like I mentioned earlier, once you've developed it. But obviously you want to make sure you save your plan. And then you can submit your plan with this tab here. So one thing I want to share before I wrap up, because I know it's time, is that obviously you want to save your plan here. You can save it with a name and add your description. Always save your plan so you won't lose all your great work. You can also open up a plan. Say, nope, this plan has been modified. All of the plans that have been that are public in the public space are here. And Mr. Holmes, kudos to you. I see Commissioner Holmes made a map. His map is here. You can click it and you can see his map, which is really great. And there's a lot of other maps. I see our Ed Council Chair, Mrs. Ebony Rose, has a map here. So please go through, and I have a couple of maps as well. Go through and take a look at some of the maps that are already available. So I know that was a marathon. I'm sorry for pushing us a little too fast. I am always happy to share any other information with you all that if you want to just chat and if you have some questions. And so with that, I'm going to pause and see if there are any questions.
Ambrose has a question.
All right.
Thank you. And kudos to you, Delia. That was an excellent presentation. I'm really, I have to give you a lot of dap on that one, Delia. And you answered one of my questions. My other question, though, was really about a collective submission and whether or not the Ward 7 Dems can create a meeting. I'm not saying it has to definitely go to maybe a ad hoc committee, but at least create a meeting in which people that are on this call and others that the Ward 7 Dems can reach out to can meet on a Saturday or whatever day or whatever evening and go through and look at strategically where we want Ward 7 to expand, and then submit that through the Ward 7 Dems, because they have been able to then garner the collective voice of everybody that wants to be a part of this in the ward.
You want me to answer that?
Yes, sir.
You can go ahead.
Oh,
But I welcome the opportunity to help out if that's needed. But go ahead, Chairman.
Once again, kudos, First Vice Chair. I think you've done an exceptional job providing a high-level overview of how to utilize this tool that was administered by the Office of Planning. I think that your presentation definitely correlates with the presentation of the council member, and it is definitely needed. In terms of next steps during this process, as previously mentioned, there is a hearing today, and I thought it was imperative that we ask the council person when is the next time or the last time individuals will have an opportunity to testify or submit the map, which is on November the 5th. And I thought that was important because I anticipated that I would have gotten a question from, not from Ambrose, but similar to Ambrose and his thinking in terms of coming together collectively as the Ward 7 Dems to submit a map. I've emphasized this to individuals that I had prior conversations with. I do think that it is important to have different perspectives as it relates to the redistricting process. However, I do believe that, us coming together and submitting something collectively is a great suggestion. So we do have a listening session on Wednesday at Marshall Heights from the hours of 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. It will be hybrid. So if folks want to come in person, then by all means, please come. But if they don't feel safe because of COVID and they want to join online, that option will be available. From the 23rd today to the 5th, we roughly have a little under 2 weeks to plan something in terms of folks who want to give input on overall map that is reflective of Ward 7 DIMS. So I'll work with the team to schedule maybe a session so folks can provide that their input. So hopefully, Ambrose, that answers your question, but we're definitely thinking on the same wavelength as it relates to what we want to see reflective in this process.
Yeah, because Mr. President, in addition to the listening session, we could certainly plan a session, maybe even at Marshall Heights, where we have a laptop. Marshall Heights has the screen, and people could be in a room and they could say, well, why don't we look at this tract over here? What does that tract bring us in terms of population, in terms of development, in terms of some of the other things that we're looking for? Because this also will have an impact on any type of bid process, business improvement district process, because that means that there would be more, as we expand, there would be more businesses that will be included in that business improvement district, which is good for Ward 7. And so that's why, I think that if we sit down, in maybe at Marshall Heights and say, okay, we've got the screen, you got this, so we all come to an agreement, and then we submit it as the Ward 7 DIMS, that doesn't take away from anyone that wants to submit individually.
Absolutely.
I would certainly want to hear the thoughts of Commissioner Holmes, because obviously he's on this call and he submitted himself and others. But I think that submitting something collectively would be powerful.
No, I wholeheartedly agree with you. I tell folks this all the time. A ward divided isn't a ward at all. So we welcome this inclusiveness, and we'll get something out as quickly as possible. So in the interest of time, I do have to make a couple of more announcements, but we want to transition into community announcements. Sorry for rushing folks, but at this point in time, we want to transition to any community announcements that folks have to make. And then after that, I'll share my big announcement, and then we're good to go for this morning's meeting. Is this a question? This is a community announcement? Oh, okay. So at this point in time, I'll transition to our Sergeant at Arms, Ms. Tiffany Brown, to take questions from the community audience.
Sure. The first hand up is State Board Rep Ebony Rose Thompson.
Good. I think I'm just on the cusp of morning, afternoon. So yes, first of all, comment, agree with Ambrose and about submitting something collective and having some shared priorities. It's very important. Announcements, a couple, mostly around legislation and bills in front of the council. Next week, there are 2 hearings that are overlapping that I hope to see more Ward 7 residents at. The first is the confirmation of the DDOT director, Everett Lott. I don't know how many people know because it was not on the news, but we had a mom and a kindergartner that were hit outside of Burville on the way home on Thursday. That was, I think, the day after we had our state board meeting where we passed a resolution around safe passage to include more traffic safety measures. I seriously encourage more of us, if we have not already signed up to testify, but to at least submit testimony. I can say as a former ANC commissioner, working with DDOT is not a pleasurable experience, and their responsiveness to Ward 7 has not been adequate. So please weigh in on that confirmation. I do want to say that at the very least, I know working with the chancellor isn't always great either, but they did have, and I reached out to the chancellor to make sure there was emotional support there, extra mental health specialists the next day because many of the students and families and staff witnessed the accident. And so I'll let people know if the family is asking for anything in particular. I've also reached out to some of the schools on major thoroughfares around what we can do for traffic calming measures. So that's the first announcement. Second announcement, this same day, same time, there are two bills in front of the council around OSSI and changes to our governance structure. I know that governance is not the sexiest topic, but it's an important one because governance is essentially who has the authority to make decisions. So if you are interested in learning more about our governance structure, our student advocate is a great resource, has a bunch of different presentations around who makes what decision, because I know that gets confusing in education. We have like 8 different entities that touch public education in our city. I'm also happy to share, I'll send a link out when I do my newsletter to a presentation that I did around our governance committee and the work that'll be done. And we as the state board will have 2 fall engagement sessions that are coming up in November and December. One of those, even though they're technically citywide meetings, will be in Ward 7. And so once those dates are available, I will share them. But those are a couple of announcements that, of course, Democrats should be paying attention to because we're talking legislation. So thanks.
The next, Mr. Ambrose Lane.
Thank you. Some of you may have heard very recently in the news that since June, 98% of the COVID deaths, coronavirus deaths in the District of Columbia have been Black people. If you do not know that, that is not something that is surprising. In May, I interviewed Dr. LaQuandra Nesbitt, Director of DC Health, and she emphasized as much in May that if we do not get our people vaccinated, this will largely become a Black disease. And that has borne out to be true. And that means that each one of us really need to talk to our communities and our young people about getting vaccinated. It is not a virus that is specific to Black people, but because we are not vaccinated and because we have high rates of chronic disease in Ward 7 and 8, we are that much more vulnerable to the coronavirus. And it is borne out. 98% of all those that have died since June have been Black people. And I wanted to emphasize that. Also, to Ebony Rose Thompson's point, I will be testifying on Tuesday at the OSSI hearing about school governance because it is an important issue. And so I just wanted to share the health news with you all, and we'll be back to share any other health news with you at a later point in time. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Ambrose. And I guess any more questions before we try? Okay, so we're going to close today's meeting. Just to let folks know that next month we're going to have a hybrid meeting. And the reason for the hybrid meeting is, we had a barbecue. It was a good event. Folks wanted to, folks who came out, they bragged about it. They said that they wanted to have more events like this, especially if it's in a safe and COVID-friendly environment. With that being said, we know that Thanksgiving is right around the corner. So what we wanted to do is have like a Thanksgiving style event in which the mayor, she was initially supposed to come to the last month's meeting, but due to an emergency, she couldn't make it. But we wanted to make this a hybrid meeting in which she'll be there in person. If folks want to come in person, we would love to have you. If you can't make it, then we would love, when I say we, the Ward 7 Dams, we would love for you to join the meeting virtually. But we also wanted to tie this meeting with kicking off the Ed Patillo Coat Drive, which will go from November 17th when it starts, in which it will start to December. So if you try to get on the Zoom call next week, next month, and you see a beautiful decorations in the background, is because we're in person as well. So bear with us, as that will be our first hybrid meeting. And we look forward to seeing you all there. So that's my announcement. If folks have any questions or concerns, I'll take them. If not, the meeting is adjourned, and I appreciate you all for spending your Saturday morning with the Ward 7 Dens.
Can you tell us where to drop off the coats and stuff at? That'd be
Good
great.
question. Yes, ma'am. You can drop the coats off on the 17th in which the event will be held. Thanks, Commissioner Douglas, at St. Luke's. We'll start marketing the event early next week. And if you are following the event, you give me a call. I can come and pick up the coats, so you can drop them off to me. We'll coordinate that offline. But
Great, because I'm collecting some now. Thank you.
yes, ma'am. Appreciate you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, dear. Well, other than that, that's all we have. I appreciate you all, and I see you next month, hopefully in person.